gaming.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Intoxicus Flanging. My name's Graham, and as always, don't panic and please remember to bring a towel. And today I hope you all brought your technical towels and long attention spans because we are getting into some technical territory. Not getting into any graphing calculator territory, don't get too freaked out, nothing like that. But this will be, I'm sure as you can all tell, this will be a longer video just because it's a dense amount of information. And I've done my best to simplify it so it's easy to understand and digest, but it's a lot there. So it's just, there's no getting around. This is just going to take a decent chunk of time. And I've done my best to condense all this. So strap in and get ready to flange. So today we're talking about anti-cheats, DRM, ring 0, what's the deal with all these rings, is Sonic collecting them, do you get lives if you get 100, and no, Sonic doesn't collect them and you don't get extra lives if you collect 100, although that would be pretty cool if there was extra lives involved, but there's not. There's security vulnerabilities and all sorts of crazy squirrely stuff involved, and there's a lot of facts that aren't in the current discussions online that should be. A lot of this information, I believe, should be more common knowledge than it is currently. And it's mostly fundamental understandings of how Windows and operating systems work. So it's kind of fundamental knowledge. I think everyone should have somewhat of a grasp on just to understand the devices they use daily. And because of the nature of talking about cheats and anti-cheat software and DRM and all this, we do got to quickly get through some disclaimer kind of territory here real quick. We're just gonna get through this as quick as possible. This is a sensitive topic. It can be contentious, emotions can run high, so I just need to get a few things cleared up and firmly established before we can really move forward with the main bulk and meat of this content. So to start off with, I have my own strong opinions and thoughts on cheaters, and those are I hate cheating. I hate online multiplayer cheaters. If you cheat in online multiplayer games in ways that negatively affect others, fuck you, you suck. That's obviously meant only for cheaters. If you're a legitimate, honest player, that's obviously not meant for you. But these next little bits are something for everyone to think about and for everyone to consider, but is mainly aimed at cheaters. So something for everyone before we get flanging proper here is cheaters screw themselves over at least as much or possibly even more so than they cause negative impacts to the people they're cheating against. And that's because with cheating, these, at least in online multiplayer cheating, these people now rob themselves of the ability to build skill and learn the game and get better at the game. I mean, how do you get better at a game while you're cheating in online multiplayer? Single player, admittedly, we do have to address quickly, is a different context. We're not talking about single player cheating where it only affects the person who's cheating. And also in a single player context, this is an important nuance. In a single player context, if it's done with the right intent, it can actually be used to help understand the game, but that's in a context where it doesn't affect anyone else. And we'll talk more on that point briefly just in a second here, but that is an important little nuance I do feel I need to mention, because when it comes to single player, that only affects the person who's cheating, and it's a different context. And the real difference is, does it affect others? And we're, like I said, we'll touch on that shortly. But to follow that up, there's another way cheaters are probably screwing themselves over. We are getting into a bit of speculative territory on this point, but I'm sure most people would agree that this is probably pretty high percentage. So this cheat software people are downloading, even paying for in many cases, it also runs at ring 0. Anyone that's concerned about the anti-cheat software running at ring 0, well, that cheat software is way greater of a concern. So any cheaters that are like, oh, that ring 0 anti-cheat software is so bad, while your cheat software is at ring 0, cheater. And those security issues that people are talking about with ring 0, even more of a problem when your stuff's cheat software that you definitely can't trust. And we'll be talking about trust too as we flange up this topic. Anyways, the point is, there's probably some nasty malware in a lot of this cheat software. And this is speculative, this is my personal speculation, but I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these cheaters have a lot of problems with stuff like online bank fraud, online identity theft, getting their bank accounts drained, and stuff like that. And I'm sure most people realize where I'm going with this. Their malware and their cheat software is probably screwing them over. And at least for us non-cheaters who have integrity, I think it's kind of interesting to be able to sit back and be like, damn, those cheaters really been screwing themselves over. Anyways, so just that's more something for everyone to think about. And just to wrap up this disclaimer kind of territory real quick, we got one last point, and that's because of the nature of this information. I need to make it clear that I've done the best within my abilities to ensure that this knowledge won't aid, assist, or encourage cheaters in any way. I'm sure by that previous spiel, it's made pretty clear I'll definitely be doing my best to discourage cheating and cheaters as much as I'm able to, by framing things in such a way as to make cheats appropriately unappealing because they're just not worth it. Anyway, so just this can be a very sensitive topic, so I feel the need to make it clear that I've done my very best to make sure that cheaters cannot benefit from this video, and it's all fundamental knowledge. It's pretty much how operating systems run and how programs interact in general for the most part. And when we get into more anti-cheat specific kind of stuff, it's all well-known stuff, well-documented stuff, and it's nothing new. It won't give anyone new ideas. The only new idea I'm going to give anyone is an idea to make anti-cheat software better when we get to that. So yeah, it's almost invariable that you'll run into someone that accuses people who are against bad anti-cheat software, accusing people of supporting cheaters, etc., etc. So I mean, it'll happen no matter what, but I do feel the need to specifically say I've done my very best to make sure this information won't help cheaters get better at cheating. So with that out of the way, we got one more little quick bit to flange through with this intro. It's not really a disclaimer, it's more kind of prepping the topic so we kind of know where I'm coming from and kind of what the fundamental premise of this content is. And to flange that up, we got to start with a fundamental principle of ethics to kind of prime what we're actually getting at here. So fundamentally with ethics, the basic core fundamental principle is the principle of do no harm, and that's generally pretty simple and intuitive. Your actions shouldn't cause harm or negative impacts onto others, knowingly or intentionally, and there's nuance and gray area, and context and intent matter, but context and intent only go so far at the same time. I just need to acknowledge that it's not as simple as that. That's just a starting point. It's just a starting point to say do no harm, don't intentionally or knowingly cause harm to others. That's just a starting point, and that's very important. That's not the end all be all. That's where ethics begins from. So springboarding off that fundamental principle of ethics, we're now going to get into another principle, and it's also a fundamental principle of criminal justice. And yes, our criminal justice systems do fall short very frequently. But if we put it in a historical context, what we have now is much better than a lot of things that have existed in the past, not to justify any of the ridiculous, insane stuff that, especially that's gone on recently. Ugh, just thinking about that. Yeah, anyways, don't want to get stuck on that. The couple recent events in the news, oh my fuck, just insane. Anyways, so huge problems with the criminal justice system, but there are people reaching for that ideal and that value of you shouldn't cause harm to those who are innocent and honest in the pursuit of those who have committed transgressions and crimes. Anyways, you should be able to see where I'm going with this when it comes to anti-cheat software and DRM and really software in general, but more so with anti-cheat and DRM because of the nature of what it's trying to do. It can't be causing a negative impact on honest, legitimate players that have integrity and have paid for their games. And, you know, it's more complicated with piracy because there is the factor of people who just can't afford it, just don't have the money, are just not in the financial position. And if they were, they would pay for the game. And that I'm cool with those people. That's different. And I believe that the portion of people that just pirate because they'll go and pirate no matter what, I truly believe that's actually a very small percentage of people. And a lot of piracy is people who can't access it properly or can't afford it easily. And the first one's more towards movie and TV than video games. But that's not the conversation we're trying to have here. But I do need to kind of cover that point just to be as complete as possible. Anyway, this is a long fucking intro. It's just there's no getting around this being a long video. It's just there's too much going on. It's just too deep a topic. And anyways, so with all the anti-cheat DRM, etc., it can't be having a negative impact on the legitimate players and customers. It just, if there's any line, that is the line, and that is the line where we should not tolerate and where we should put our foots down and be like, no, if it's having a negative impact on those who have legitimately paid and aren't cheating and aren't doing anything squirrely and screwing around, that's just not acceptable. To be having a negative performance impact or any serious negative impacts. And there are issues of trade-offs and risk versus reward. We're going to get into that more as we get into the content. And so that's just that idea that's very fundamental, at least to me, that this software can't be causing a negative impact to those of us that are honest and paying and legitimate, is kind of the key point underlying this whole content. So we really got to cover that territory. And that's pretty much the intro section, and we're going to flange into the actual content now. So Ring Zero, all this stuff, we're going to start by breaking that down. But first, how did I get here? Well, first I wanted to do a Denuvo anti-cheat Doom Eternal video, breaking that all down. Then as I was doing the research, I realized there's a lot more to this than is going on in the conversations, and there's a lot of facts missing from the conversations going on online. So I figured it'd be of more value to the gaming community as a whole just to do this comprehensive breakdown of what's going on with Ring Zero and the DRM and the anti-cheat. So that's where we are, and it's just there's just a lot to unpack here, so there's just no getting around this being a longer video. I'm doing my best to keep the time down, but it just is what it is. Although I don't like saying it is what it is, but this is a case where it is what it is. Anyway, so what is Ring Zero? What are these rings? What's going on? Why is it a big deal? Why is it so important? Why can there be all these crazy security vulnerabilities? And we're going to have to start kind of with how computers work, and build from there. So at a fundamental level, computers only follow instructions, and this is where trust comes in. And even with so-called AI these days, which is being very generous to call it AI, the current machine learning is still just following instructions. It's starting to get past just following instructions, but we're still not there yet. We're still just following instructions, which is a big deal because that means a program is only as good as the programmer or programmers. So, and that's why it really comes down to trust, because you got to trust the people that made this program to do it well and do it properly and not leave security vulnerabilities and double check their work, etc., etc. So it's another kind of fundamental thing before we really get into it, is you gotta trust what you install, and that applies to everything. And as we're going to find out, a lot can happen at Ring 3. Way more than most people would ever realize can happen at Ring 3. Malware can be at Ring 3, is almost always at Ring 3. It's malware's big at Ring 3, keyloggers at Ring 3, etc., etc. Your virus scanner, you'd guess it all goes to Ring 0 to do stuff like get rootkits and stop viruses and all that, only goes as low as Ring 1. So just let that sink in. Your antivirus only goes as low as Ring 1. Your antivirus doesn't even need Ring 0. And we'll get into all this right away here, but we do need to kind of go over this fundamental just principle of computing and computing science in general, that computers only do what they're told. They only follow instructions, and a program and a computer are only as good as the people that gave it the instructions. So, and that's exactly why trust is so important, because if the computer's given bad instructions, you've got a bad program, and then it's just bad. So that flanged up because that's a fundamental, we need to flange up before we actually get into the rings. And you can see why this is going to be a long video. There's just things we need to, pieces we need to put together before we can get a proper big picture view of this. So the rings and all that, what actually is it and what's going on? So it's something called hierarchical protection domains, and it's a tiered protection, privilege, permission system to prevent software from accessing hardware too directly and being able to do squirrely, malicious things. And just, it's good for security, it's good for stability, also because when it comes to apps running, like if they're talking to hardware too directly and then they're not well done, they'll start causing like blue screens and serious crashes and stuff like that. Issues with how drivers were handled was a big reason why there's like, before Windows 10, well, Windows 7 they got better with the driver handling, but there's driver handling issues that made Windows unstable and crashy that have been changed. We're not going to talk about that. It's not so relevant. It's just in the bigger picture. It's an interesting tidbit that how Windows has changed its driver handling has actually directly improved its stability. And so with these rings, with the hierarchical protection domains, you've got two primary tiers before we get into the ring. So you've got your system space and your user space. Your system space is like, that's where your kernel is. That's like where the drivers and the hardware talking to happens. User space is like where all your programs regularly run. So rings 1 through 3 are user space, and ring 0 is system space. And then you got some negative rings, which we'll touch on when we get there. But there are some interesting negative rings, kind of have to do with stuff like virtual machines and some interesting stuff going on with those negative. There's like a -1, a -2, and a -3 ring, and there can even be such a thing as a negative ring -3 rootkit. See, there's a lot to this. So with system space, that's ring 0 pretty much. That's your kernel. That's where all your like hardware flanging happens and all that action goes on. So like that's where writing to RAM happens, RAM addressing, talking to various pieces of hardware. So there's in between ring 0 and hardware, there's something called the hardware abstraction layer. We're not going to talk about that in this video. It's just not important to this specific content. But it is important in the bigger picture. It's just not so relevant to this discussion we're having right now. So with ring 0, that's, you can do pretty much whatever you want there when you're in system space slash the kernel, and it's very important to protect that area. You talk to security experts, they'll tell you pretty much only drivers should be in ring 0. Nothing else should really be there, and they'll definitely tell you 3 things that shouldn't be there. I'm sure you can guess what those 3 things are. Cheat software, anti-cheat software, DRM, none of that should be in ring 0. And it's a security stability thing, and we'll get into the real more specific reasons why, but we do gotta talk about rings 1 through 3 a little bit more. So really only ring 3 gets used. Rings 1 and 2 are there, at least in Intel CPUs, but not really in AMD CPUs. In AMD CPUs, they only use rings 0 and 3, and then they emulate rings 1 and 2 on the odd occasions they need them. Because the thing with the rings is they're baked into the hardware too. It's not just an operating system thing, it's a hardware level thing. It's part of the CPU also. And it has to be, otherwise it wouldn't really work. And so it gets interesting because just no one really ever bothered using rings 1 and 2 much. So it's just, they've been there, but just no one really bothered using them for all sorts of reasons. And that's why AMD doesn't really actually have them there in a hardware level and emulates them, because they're just not used that much. Because, I mean, that's the thing. You could have this ring system, get rid of rings 1 and 2, and just have like ring 1, you know, a ring 1 that's equivalent to ring 3 and ring 0, and just get rid of those extra 2 rings. If they were used, it could help with security, but they just, yeah. We don't need to go into that too much more, but it is worth mentioning. Rings 1 and 2 just aren't used really. It's more ring 3s, it's more ring 3 and ring 0. And ring 1 -1 only comes up with virtual machines, and ring -2 and -3 are more for like Ring -2 is for your UEFI BIOS stuff, where that kind of stuff happens, and like I think that's also where like secure boot and stuff will happen. And then ring -3 is the Intel management engine, Intel ME. Or for AMD, they've got what they call AMD PSP. I forget what that's an acronym or initialism for. Or now they call it AMD Secure Technology or Secure Processor. It's kind of the same thing, just AMD's version of the Intel ME. And so when it comes to like Spectre and Meltdown and stuff, that has to do with Ring -3 and the Intel management engine. Just some fun facts out there, not so relevant to this discussion, but interesting to know to help just build up this bigger picture. And just to reiterate, this ring protection is hardware level stuff. It's baked into the CPU. It's not just in the operating system. It's an interaction between the CPU and the operating system. And so another point I do need to mention is Ring Zero's closest to hardware, and I mentioned that hardware abstraction layer. So I mean, I'll have that various visual aids popping up at various points, so you can visually see it. And we're not going to talk about the hardware abstraction layer much, other than it's the go in between Ring Zero and the actual hardware, and Ring Zero is what actually talks to hardware. So, and I'll explain why this is important shortly, but I'm going to explain kind of how Ring 3 and Ring 0 talk to each other, because, Ring 3, anything that goes on at Ring 3 still needs to talk to drivers and stuff. So it just does that indirectly and gets Ring 0 to do the work, and it does what's called a system call. So, let's say you're running a game, and we got, I forget which hand I did or which last demo. So we'll do Ring 3 right hand. So Ring 3 is here. Ring 3 is like, hey, your user wants to play a video game. I need to like load a bunch of stuff into RAM and interact with a bunch of hardware like the SSD and graphics card, keyboard, mouse, etc. So Ring 3 is like bunch of system calls. Hey, Ring 0, I'm making system calls. Ring 0 is like, oh shit, Ring 3 is making system calls. What do you need, Ring 3? Ring 3 tells Ring 0 what it needs. Ring 0 is like, okay, I got it. I'm doing all the work, and I'll give it back to you. And that's important, because Ring 0 does the work at Ring 0. Ring 3 doesn't go to Ring 0 and does the work. It tells Ring 0 what it needs, and Ring 0 does the work for Ring 3, then gives Ring 3 all the results. This does have a performance impact. You can get slightly faster operations going if you just have a Ring 0 system, but then that becomes very vulnerable. So it's generally not done, but it is possible to have a Ring 0 only system and actually get a performance boost, because there's not this gating system with system calls where the higher rings are like, oh, I can't do the work, I have to get the lower ring to do it, and then the lower ring can tell me what it's done when it's done doing the work. And that's a very important factor in the security and stability, because there's another factor with system space and user space. User space, every process and program has its own private little area, so nothing gets mixed up. In system space, everything's shared. So when things go to system space, things can really be messed with potentially, and I'm sure people can start seeing why cheat software wants to be at Ring 0. With everything being shared, if anything goes, it's also a stability thing though. If anything goes wrong in system space, it can just blue screen the whole system, because everything's shared. So any program running can affect another program running in ways that wouldn't happen in user space. And that's part of the security and stability issues. And that brings us to something called the principle of least privilege. So for all these reasons we've gone over, there's something called the principle of least privilege, which should seem pretty intuitive and obvious to most people, and that's any program or app, software running, etc., should only have a minimum level of privileges and permissions needed to do what it needs to do. And it should be pretty obvious why that is. It's good for stability and security just in general. And it begs the question, does this Ring 0 anti-cheat stuff going on, does that respect the principle of least privilege? Security experts will tell you no, it does not, and no, that stuff shouldn't be at Ring 0. And so how and why do they justify running at Ring 0? Well, part of the thing with Ring 0 is it actually runs technically before the operating system in a bunch of ways, because your drivers have to load before the operating system does for your operating system to even be able to boot. If your operating system can't even talk to your hard drive or SSD, it's not even able to boot. So that's the thing. The BIOS, which now is the UEFI in Ring -2, does a bunch of stuff to get things ready for the operating system to be able to boot, including loading drivers so the operating system can talk to hardware at all. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to even load the operating system, let alone have stuff show up on your screen, etc. So that's one of the biggest reasons, or not anti-cheat, cheat software wants to be at Ring 0, is it wants to get ahead of the anti-cheat software and be able to hide itself and be able to do squirrely things more easily without being detected. And yeah, so that's why cheat software wants to be there. Now the anti-cheat software is justifying being at Ring 0 because the cheat software is there, and they're like, oh, but that makes us more effective at catching the cheat software, which, to be objective and fair, there is a slight advantage at being at Ring 0. It is a little bit better at catching new and private cheats specifically, but with the example of Valve Anti-Cheat at Ring 3, we'll discover they don't really actually have that much of an advantage at Ring 0. Even though there is a slight advantage, it's not that huge. And this is also a good point to be talking about how much can be done in that Ring 3, which we've already mentioned, I believe. And a lot can be done at Ring 3. Like a lot can be done at Ring 3. Like I was saying before, your antivirus only goes down to Ring 1. So you don't need kernel level access to do a lot. And that's the thing, because of the system calls and how that works, when you install an app, it's given certain permissions and privileges at the Ring 3 level. So when it makes that system call, if it's got the whatever privileges it was installed with, then the system calls like, oh, it's got the right privileges, it's got administrator privileges, we'll just let it do the system call, even if it's like a keylogger or malware or something. So that's where things get squirrely, is, something can get packaged in with the legitimate install, where you give it administrator privileges. When you click that, oh, can give it administrator privileges to continue dialogue, and without unwittingly you've installed malware at administrator privilege levels, and even though it's at Ring 3, it can do a lot of damage and spy on a lot of stuff. So with existing malware that's commonly at Ring 3, and as an example of how much can happen at Ring 3, we'll now move on to what Valve Anti-Cheat can do at Ring 3. It scans your memory for active processes so it can detect active cheat software based on known existing cheats and also pattern recognition. It scans stuff like your DNS log, so it knows what websites you've been to. And again, this is all documented, known stuff. This isn't telling anyone new. This won't help anyone. So yeah, it does stuff like scan your DNS log so it knows what websites you've been to, so it flags you if you've been to any cheat related websites. So it does like further scanning and analysis and looks at you a lot more closely if it notices you've been to any websites that are cheat related, of which it's kind of interesting to note I've probably been flagged because of the research I had to do. And also on that note, those websites will not be in the sources list because obviously I ethically am not able to put certain sources in the list because I can't direct people to those websites. Yeah, anyway, it's just kind of interesting to be like, shit, I got flagged, even though it won't matter because I don't do anything that would go further than that. But yeah, it's just interesting, like, damn, doing research for this got me flagged in VAC, didn't it? And it's also interesting because Valve Anti-Cheat at Ring 3 has been criticized for being overly intrusive because of doing stuff like memory scanning, checking your web history, etc., etc. And it's a good example of how much can be done at Ring 3 that I don't think a lot of people realize how much can be done at Ring 3. And this is why trust is such a big deal. You don't need to install it at Ring 0 for it to do a lot of damage and be malware. It just needs administrator privileges at Ring 3 pretty much. And yeah, so do these anti-cheats really need Ring 0? Well, from what I can tell, most security experts would tell you no. And this is a thing about trade-offs and risk versus reward more so, because no matter what, it gets back into the issue of trust. Like, you're kind of taking a risk every time you install software, no matter what it is. And it's something you really have to decide for yourself where you're going to draw the line and what you think is too much risk for the reward. Personally, I think Ring Zero anti cheats are not worth the risk, and I don't think it's worth the trade offs. I think it's too much a security vulnerability. It'll be in the sources list. I'll hopefully pull it up for the video here. But yeah, there's an analysis of over 40 like just regular standard device signed device drivers that have serious flaws that could open your computer up to serious hacking at Ring Zero. So it's not just anti-cheat software at Ring Zero. You're just regular drivers you install from like, and I like EVGA. They're on the list. Gigabyte, like the names, there's like 20 companies on this list that are putting these drivers out that have huge security vulnerabilities. Asus, ASRock's an Asus division of Asus, anyways. So I mean, we got big, well-known gaming brands putting out drivers that have serious vulnerabilities too. It's not just anti-cheat; it's everything. Down to your device drivers, at least in terms of the issue of trust. Do you trust them? And how much can we trust them? And I mean, it's kind of a rock and a hard place situation, because if you've got the hardware installed, you have to use their drivers if you want the hardware to work. So this is where it becomes up to us to put pressure on these companies to quit slacking and do a better job, especially when some of this hardware and stuff is pretty freaking expensive. I'm talking about Nvidia and Intel mainly there. Um, but just in general, like, high-end hardware is not cheap. I want my drivers to not have security vulnerabilities. That doesn't seem like too much to ask, although at the same time, anything humans can make, humans can also unmake, and it is a constant cat and mouse game. And speaking of the cat and mouse game, a point I missed earlier that is important too is the RAM addressing that happens at Ring Zero. And that's important because that's where the cat and mouse game really happens in a very real sense. Is the RAM addressing is another reason the cheat software wants to be at Ring Zero, is because with how RAM's written and the layers of virtual address space and physical address space and how that works, we don't have time to get deep into that or anything. I might have a visual aid. I'm not sure. I'm having trouble finding a really good visual aid on that one. So anyways, with the RAM addressing stuff, that's where the cheat software can disguise itself as a legitimate program and basically make itself look like it's not cheat software to try and hide from the anti-cheat software. And that's why Valve does the memory scanning. And that's why all this anti-cheat software wants to be at Ring Zero, because it does have more direct access to the RAM addressing and what's going on there. It can see it a bit better and more directly and more immediately. So there is a slight advantage with the anti-cheat being at Ring Zero. But in my personal opinion, and it seems that most security experts would agree with this opinion, that risk is not worth the reward. And the thing is, there are other ways to do it that are pretty damn effective. And they might not have that slight advantage, but I think there's a way to get a better advantage than being at Ring Zero while staying at Ring 3 / maybe Rings 1 or 2 if that's actually relevant. And that's machine learning. I touched on machine learning and AI a little bit earlier, but machine learning is really good at pattern analysis and predictive pattern analysis and pattern matching. And that's perfect for an anti-cheat. It's like a match made in heaven. And it's actually doing this research, I wound up sitting here being like, where the hell is our machine learning based anti-cheat solution? And then I was thinking about it, I was like, well, that's some specialized knowledge that's going to be more expensive and harder to hire the people, just because there's not so many people that are that specialized in it, just because it's a newer thing. So with machine learning, I think I wouldn't be surprised if just they haven't thought of it, just because the people running these projects at these companies just aren't that kind of creative, because sometimes these aren't creative people and they just do what they're told. With all respect to them, all respect to the people still, I don't want to be disrespectful. Anyways, so there could be a lack of creativity and just they haven't even thought of it. Or there could be a factor where they don't want to spend the extra time, effort, and cost on it because to hire these people, it's going to cost more because they're going to want to be paid more for their specialized knowledge. And then it's going to just take more time and effort to do it because it's a new, innovative thing to do. But the rewards for going through that extra time, cost, and effort would be massive to have the first machine learning based anti cheat. That wasn't at Ring Zero, that worked better than any other anti cheat, or at least on paper it should. So yeah, I wanted to throw that idea out there. I hope there's some devs watching this that are like, shit, we need a machine learning based anti-cheat. Or maybe there's someone with some deep technical knowledge that'll jump in the comments and be like, there's a factor you missed that makes that not so viable. And just on that note, any technical professionals or people that are deeply technically knowledgeable, if I have made any errors or mistakes, I am open to corrections. Just please be respectful and kind about correcting me. And if I have made significant or enough mistakes, I will do a correction video if required, but hopefully that won't be necessary. So anyways, to kind of wrap up the more anti-cheat focused section, I feel like we're in some cure worse than the disease territory. I don't think the trade-offs are worth the risk, and I think they can do it better. I think there's other options. I think they need to spend the time, money, and effort in doing it better. And Valve Anti-Cheat is a great example of someone that does it better at Ring 3. And quickly before we move on to a short little section on DRM, Valve Anti-Cheat gets a lot of criticism for not being very effective, but it's got, and this is a well-documented known thing, not telling anyone new, it's got a system of randomized delayed bans. And with that, it winds up creating this false perception and impression that it's not very effective because you'll get lots of players that see the person that was cheating still continue to play for a period of time after they were reported. And that's the thing, is they get banned, but it doesn't take in effect until a random interval later after the ban is registered. And that's to obfuscate what caused the ban, so they don't know what to do to prevent the ban. So it's literally the cat and mouse game. But this is another trade-off thing, and I think this is a case where the trade-off is worth it, is some cheaters will be allowed to continue for a short period of time before they get banned in order to keep new cheats from getting better. And that's a trade-off that makes sense to me, even though it can be a bit frustrating and give people a false impression that the anti-cheat is ineffective. Vanguard, the always-on Ring Zero anti-cheat that's also blown up recently, has been getting the same criticisms for being ineffective because of the randomized delayed bans. And just that another anti-cheat that's running at Ring 0 is getting that same criticism Valve anti-cheat's getting at Ring 3 tells me that Valve anti-cheat's more effective than it's being given credit for. And unfortunately, we can't really see a lot of numbers and stats and stuff because they want to keep a lid on that kind of information because they don't want it to help cheaters. So it's a little bit frustrating, but understandable and makes sense. I'm having a brain fart. Anyways, don't think it was that big of a deal. Anyways, so we should get into the DRM territory now and try and wrap this up quickly. The DRM little bit here won't take nearly as long. This is mostly about the anti-cheat. The DRM's more a tangential, relevant thing. What was that point? If I remember, I'll get back to it. Anyways, it's just something slipping my mind here I need to mention. Anyways, so with the DRM, we're going to start with more historical thing that's more a cautionary tale of why Ring 0 DRM and anti-cheats can be very disastrous. So I'm sure many people have heard of Star Force. I should be flanging up a link floating around so people can get some more information about that, because we're not going to talk too much about it, more just a broad historical overview. So Star Force was a DRM made by Sony for CDs and DVDs. It was a disaster, ran at Ring 0, was literally a rootkit. Destroyed PCs, lawsuits, the works. It was just a fucking disaster. It was bad. And it's pretty much the cautionary tale of why software like that should not be running in Ring 0. It just, if it fucks up bad. And that's the thing, this Ring 0 anti-cheat stuff going on, the security vulnerability hasn't been tapped into, or potential security vulnerabilities haven't been tapped into yet, but also they could be already tapped into, but the people doing it are not saying anything about it so they can keep hacking it. That's the thing, a lot of smart hackers don't say anything when they figured out a hack so they can keep using it. So I won't be surprised if there's a bunch of people that have hacked it but aren't saying a damn thing so they can keep on hacking it. Anyway, so just Star Force is the cautionary tale. But what happened after Star Force was Securom by the same people at Sony, if I'm getting that right. So Securom is the infamous video game DRM that is now Denuvo. Securom was well known for tanking performance, causing crashes, and just having a really bad negative impact on legitimate paying players. Like we touched on that point earlier, if there's any line, that's the line. So yeah, Securom just sucked. It wasn't good. It didn't fulfill their promises of lack of performance impact. And then they got bought out by another company from Sony and became Denuvo and continued to do the same shit pretty much because it's the same people. So you can go to the Denuvo website and you'll run into a bunch of false and misleading advertising where they make outright false claims that their DRM solution, and I'd extend this to the anti-cheat solution as well, does not negatively impact performance or negatively impact legitimate players, and there's just been too much third-party testing that proves that false. And yeah, if I was Bethesda or any of these companies been buying Denuvo software, I'd be talking to my legal team about suing them over this shit because they're just lying to their customers, and their customers are the game companies we get mad at for using DRM. So it's like, gaha, come on guys, go after Denuvo as the companies that are getting ripped off by Denuvo. Anyways, that's my personal thought on that. Anyways. So why is Denuvo and Securom such a squirrely, crappy DRM? Well, I've learned that it uses an old version, a very outdated version of something called VM Protect, which is an existing DRM/software security solution, sometimes used for just like CD keys kind of stuff, or also used as DRM for like just regular applications that are not games. So they bought a license for VM Protect, ripped off their software, and are basically using a ripped off version of VM Protect, which uses virtualization, virtual machines, at ring -1 to do all the DRM stuff instead of using forms of encryption. And that's the point I think I missed, is the ring -1 and -2, -3. It's not really, it's kind of below zero, but it's kind of also outside that system in a sense. But you get into some interesting, unique territory once you get into these negative rings, and it's just, I just don't have the time to go that deep into the research to fully understand how that works. But it's different how ring -1 talks to ring 0 because of the virtual machine context, and now you get things like a guest system versus host system. And I should be throwing up a little visual aid to help understand that a little bit, but we just don't have the time to go too deep on that. Like, this is a long video. So that's part of the reasons it's so squirrely, because it's doing all this wacky virtual machine stuff to do the DRM on outdated virtualization protection software that apparently it's so old it should be very easy to crack Denuvo, because these old versions are like just kind of open and out there. So the code they're basing their DRM on is like old outdated crap they've ripped off of someone else, that you just got to go to the old code to unwrap their code pretty much. Yeah, that was interesting running into. So their DRM's just kind of crappy and kind of lazy. And on that note, if anyone criticizes this ring 0 anti-cheat stuff as lazy and low effort, in my personal opinion, I'd agree with that. There's a lot of lazy, low effort flanging when it comes to this DRM and anti-cheat stuff going on. And more so with DRM, the issue is that they're just lying about it in the face of facts otherwise. And, you know, if they're like, oh, okay, we acknowledge we're not doing this properly, we're going to improve it, that'd be a different story. But they're not. They're continuing to lie about it. And this seems to be causing the companies that are purchasing it to also lie about it. So this is an issue with the Denuvo anti-cheat and Doom Eternal. So when Denuvo anti-cheat was introduced to Doom Eternal, there's a whole bunch of performance issues and stuff, and the Doom developers are not saying it was caused by the integration of Denuvo anti-cheat, but learning about how this stuff works, like they have to integrate the executable or integrate the anti-cheat and or DRM into the executable on their own. So if it's not well done, they're going to have a hard time doing that integration, which could result in stuff like memory leaks and actually be the true source of the performance issues. Is it's too difficult to integrate their poorly made software. And it also creates a situation where Denuvo might be able to get away with being like, oh, well, it's the dev's fault if they can't integrate it well. And it's like, no, Denuvo, you own your actions. If your software is too hard to integrate that no one can get it right, that's on you, Denuvo. And obviously, I feel quite strongly about some of these things. So yeah, we're gone quite late on time. We do need to wrap this up, but I did remember that point I was derping on earlier. So with the anti-cheats, we got some always-on anti-cheats. We got Vanguard, Faceit, ESEA. Now you're even more vulnerable with the always-on for what should be obvious reasons because it's always on. Like all the other anti-cheat only actually runs when it actually on or like actually needed when you're actually playing the game. And when it's always on, now that vulnerability is always there instead of just being, oh, they can only hack you when that game's running because it's not actually active to be able to be hacked. Even though there could be DLL driver files that could maybe still be vulnerable, it's even more security vulnerability. But there is a nuance I do need to touch on where there actually is a specific context where an always on ring 0 anti-cheat can be acceptable and I think is actually okay and fine. And that's esports competition. So Faceit and ESEA are both seem to be meant specifically for esports competition. Now, if you're thinking about not just like people competing at an event, but people competing in esports from their own home, that's when an always on ring 0 anti-cheat actually makes sense to me, but only in that context. And that's a real specific important nuance, is only in the context of competitive esports do I think it's acceptable to have a ring 0 always on anti-cheat. And it should be obvious why that is. When you're in competitive esports, if someone's screwing around, that needs to be found out like that and needs to be actioned like that. Perfect example, the Counter-Strike event that happened just recently. Cheaters won and they didn't deal with it very well, and they're criticizing VAC, but as far as I can tell, the Faceit anti-cheats involved in this, and like it brings up the bigger issue of nothing's perfect. There's none of these anti-cheat solutions are going to be perfect. They're not going to stop all cheats. That's I dislike saying things are impossible, but it seems impossible to stop all cheating. And I hate to say that. I wish it were more possible, or at least felt more possible. And the point is, this goes back to the security concerns. Humans are flawed. We're inherently flawed creatures. We're not perfect, and really what matters is when we make mistakes, how we handle those mistakes and correct those mistakes. And yeah, but it gets it's different when those mistakes can cost people a lot, and when it's not just a mistake, they're not really putting the effort in they should have in the first place. So when it comes to the ring 0 anti-cheat, and we're getting into more of my personal opinion territory again, I don't think it's an acceptable trade-off. I don't think it's an acceptable risk versus reward, except in the case of competitive esports kind of stuff, but that's a specific exception. So other than that, I don't think ring 0 anti-cheats are acceptable. I don't think we should accept them. I think we should all put our foot down and say no. Stop using ring 0. take the time and effort to do it better, especially when we got all these microtransactions and shit going on. Like, half the time these companies are raking in money after you've bought the game for $80. I'm in Canada, so $60 if you're in the US. So you bought the game for either 60 or 80 or whatever the currency conversion is where you're living, and now you're doing microtransactions on top of that in many cases, and they can't afford to pay for better anti-cheat or offer these companies money to take the time and effort to actually do it better and properly. And then we got Valve doing it at ah man. Okay, start that sentence all over again. We got Valve anti-cheat doing it at Ring 3, actually being quite effective, even though not always getting credit for how effective they actually can be. And they show that it can be effectively done at Ring 3. Valve anti-cheat could definitely be even better still than it is, but they can do a lot from Ring 3. They don't need Ring 0. And even Valve anti-cheat initially wanted Ring 0 and thought they could only be effective at Ring 0. They got a bunch of backlash for that. Gabe Newell came back and was like, you know what? You guys are right. We don't need Ring 0. We're going to stick to Ring 3. So that's an interesting little tale there. Valve wanted Ring 0. Backlash happened. Then they're like, okay, we'll figure it out. And they did. So yeah, I guess that's probably the best place to end this content. There's so much more I want to say, but let's just, I mean, we're going to hit way too close to a freaking hour here. It's just, there's just so much to go over. So anyways, I stream regularly, should be scheduled in the comments, or description, I mean. So if if you want to, just debate, discuss this, whatever, I love just having fact-based, respectful debates. So if you want to discuss or debate this, the Twitch streams are a great time to do it because it's immediate live interaction. You can also hit me up on Twitter. Of course, there's the comments here. If you want to comment, let me know what you think. And also, I need to conclude on this thought. It's up to you. It's up to you to decide what you trust. It's up to you to decide what your opinion is. I've offered my opinions, but my opinion should not be your opinion. You need to form your own opinion based on the facts presented here. And also, there's a big list of sources. There's all sorts of stuff you can go through yourself to do your own research and verify for yourself if you think my research is correct or incorrect. And I want to hear from you. What do you think? Do you think the trade-offs are worth it? Do you think it's worth Ring 0 to try and be that little bit of an advantage to stop cheaters? Or do you think that the security vulnerabilities or potential for security vulnerabilities are not worth the risk? Let me know. I'm curious what your opinions are and what you think. And also, as I said before, if I've made any serious mistakes or anything like that, anyone that's technically knowledgeable, please let me know. Please correct me respectfully, and also please bring facts and cite sources to correct me. It needs to be a fact-based correction with sources, otherwise I won't really pay much attention to it, with all respect. I'm big on facts and sources and stuff, as you can tell by the big source list that comes in the description of this video. And yeah, if you like this content, give me a thumbs up. This is the kind of stuff I want to do. I'm a new creator, kind of finding my way still, got a lot to learn. So if some of the production quality is not as good as it could be, your support helps encourage me to keep flanging this up. And just in general, I'm looking to improve. I'm looking for constructive feedback and criticism that's respectful. So yeah, anything you can do to help me out. So if you do give me a thumbs down, just do me the favor of giving me do me the favor of giving me some constructive, critical but respectful feedback to help me earn that thumbs up next time. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for supporting if you've chosen to do so. And as always, have a good one. Remember to bring a towel and don't panic. Bye.